Hello there. Today you're going to learn a bunch of stuff. First of all, the social, political, and economic system in Great Britain back in the 18th, and it's really interesting.
Yes, that's right, and it's going to be fantastic. We are going to start by my topic, that is the political system. Back in those days, there were no radical political changes until 1832, and before that, Great Britain was ruled this way. Only wealthy men with property rights could vote, women were banned from voting, the House of Lords could overrule any law, and only men could be in that thing.
Wow, that was very unfair, wasn't it?
Yes, you're right, Isabella, and that wasn't all. First, a group of men called the Clubman Secret wanted the end of slavery and cruel sports, but they were unheard, of course.
Really? That's very bad. But how were the conditions for the workers?
Well, Britain actually depended a lot on its working class. Without factories, workers, and mines, Britain would have been paralyzed. But if working class was so important to Britain, why they didn't have recognition and voice in the political world?
Well, I don't know.
Well, the answer is really obvious. France experienced a revolt for giving power to the workers, and that was exactly what they wanted to avoid.
How was the working class formed? How many classes existed?
The social classes were really marked during this time. They were the upper class or aristocracy. They had money and political power. So they could afford their education, they could improve their lifestyle and live more. They socialized only with the people from their own class. The middle class, they also had money and power, but less than the people in the upper class. It was a class of merchants and businessmen who made their money in trade. The working class, they were the peasants who had to come to the city to work, and they had political power.
Oh, now I remember. Thank you.
Anytime you want. Wait, I know a fun fact that happened before that.
Really? What is it?
On May 11th of 1812, John Bellingham shot the Prime Minister Spencer Perceval. He's known because he was the first Prime Minister to ever be assassinated.
Oh, that's awful.
I know something too. From 1811 to 1816, textile workers in the Midlands and the North England started to break machines with the fear that those machines will cause them unemployment. They were called Luddites, and if they were by any chance caught, they were hanged.
And that was the only revolt?
Of course not. There were a lot. Like, for example, the one in 1817. Textile workers tried to march to London, and they were called blanketeers because most of them were wearing blankets, and the soldiers stopped them violently. Oh, and also there was one in 1819. It was called the Petroloo Massacre. A crowd of about 60,000 people gathered at St. Peter's Field in Manchester to hear a called Henry Hunt. In spite of the fact that the people were unarmed and peaceful, the authorities sent the soldiers. As a result of this, 11 people were killed and approximately hundreds were harmed.
Oh, that's unfair. And after that, there was something called the Cat Street Conspiracy, in which some men planned to murder and overthrow the government. But they had a weak plan, and 5 of these men were sentenced to death, and the other 5 were transported to Australia for life.
Yes, that's right. Let's remember that after the victory of the Battle of Waterloo in 1815, England gained power in business, commercial and manufacturing interests, and then London became an important financial capital in the world.
And also, despite the government's attempt to stop protest, the desire of a political change grew, and the desire of a political change came not only from the working class, but it also came from the middle class, and this was something that those in power should be worried about. After this, the upper class became more and more isolated.
And don't forget that William IV became king, and he actually let change happen, and that was really good.
And also in 1832, the Great Reform happened, and after that, the number of the ones who could vote rose from 432,000 to 652,000.
But don't forget that women couldn't vote yet, and that was very unfair. In fact, the only thing that they were allowed to do was being a wife. Being married to a man was the highest honor they could achieve.
Oh, yes, that's right.
But more changes started happening in 1832, and numerous factories and mines forbade acts of abuse of children and women workers.
Then Queen Victoria came to the throne, and all expected that women finally would have a chance to have rights and that their voice could be actually heard. But that didn't happen. Queen Victoria was literally against woman rights, even though she was a woman. That is really strange, don't you think?
Yes, very. Then a group called the Charlists rose, and it represented the working class, and it presented to change the political system.
Oh yes, but it ended in 1848, and it accomplished that the workers could organize themselves, and that was a great accomplishment for them. Then the workers understood that they had to play their part even if they could organize themselves. And despite they were a vital part in the industrial strength, they had no political rights.
In 1851, new model unions developed. These were for skilled men, but at the end of the century, they did not pay much attention if the men were actually skilled or not. And the name of their political power was the labor power. Oh my God.
Oh, that's right. And then in 1867, the Second Reform Act was passed, and this said that the workers could vote. The number of those who could vote increased to 2.5 million, and 45 constitutions were moved to towns and cities from small areas. But the women still couldn't vote. Not all men could vote. There were some poor men who were denied the right to vote, and there were 30 million people in Britain, so 2.5 represented a very small percentage of those who could actually vote.
Oh yes, don't forget that there were two main politicians all the time. They were Benjamin Disraeli and William Gladstone. They were making good changes in society.
And don't forget about the Secret Ballot Act passed in 1872. And then the Third Reform Act passed and increased the number of the working class men who could vote. But women still weren't allowed to vote. Women started to organize themselves into a unit that demanded the right to vote. This movement is known as the right of suffrage. It is important to know that the Industrial Revolution wasn't the best choice for everyone, because even though it helped with the health and transporting issues, it wouldn't risk the life of all the workers that had their job in mines and factories. It also made that a lot of people who lived in the borders of the city had to move to the city, and that made that the cities had no control. Also, religion was affected because of this event. It started dealing with a lot of troubles. In 1851, a survey showed that less than the half of the population were at the church on a Sunday, even allowing for those who were ill or could not make it because of some reason. It meant the absence of the population. Poor people didn't go frequently to church.
But what happened with the slaves?
Thanks to the Treaty of the Suppression of the African Slave Trade, signed by the United States and the Britannic Majesty in February 17th, 1863, African Americans and all the slaves were free. That promoted equality, social change too.
So in conclusion, Great Britain during this period was very unpredictable, having some wars and financial and social crises. But their industrial base still grew. They expanded greatly in their international trade.